essential skill in 7 essential skills to build your career. We're going to focus on number 5, boosting communication and interpersonal effectiveness. This section consists of 4 lessons. CO01, getting on the same page, communication ground rules. CO02, tuning in for better listening. CO03, navigating employee conflicts for optimal results. And CO04, boosting communication by managing up and across. This lesson is called Tuning in for Better Listening. Active listening for improved communication and understanding. Active listening. This module will cover rules for listening, poor listening behaviors, tips for better listening. Also save the conversation by summarizing, asking questions, validating, and evaluating the conversation. This section will talk about effective listening. Research indicates that up to 90% of all communication occurs through nonverbal signs like eye contact, facial expressions, and so forth. You have to pay close attention to the verbal content of what people say, but also to the nonverbal signs as well. You must learn to listen to what people are saying, but also attend to the content of their message, the feeling behind it, and the meaning about what they're trying to say. By becoming a better listener, you will gain a better understanding of people and their messages, while encouraging them to speak more openly with you, become more involved in what they are communicating, grow more spontaneous and creative, and develop trust and credibility in your work relationships. At least half of the communication process is based on effective listening. Here are some bad habits that can become barriers to effective communication. Being judgmental. Don't make assumptions and have prejudices and preconceptions about the person that you're talking to. Be objective. Sometimes when you identify so much with the speaker, you lose objectivity, thinking and speaking about your own experiences rather than theirs. Giving advice too soon, rather than allowing the other person to deal with his or her thoughts, feelings, and experiences. Taking over with personal stories or taking sides. Let the person have the floor and talk to you about their own issue. Trying to be right rather than hearing the other person's point of view objectively and clearly. Or changing the subject when the speaker really needs to communicate something. Also, placating the speaker by making comforting statements because you are unable or unwilling to listen with empathy. Also, assuming you know what they were going to say and jumping ahead. Or dismissing their concerns as not important. These are bad listening habits that demonstrate an inability to be empathetic and relate well to the person that's talking. When listening, it's important to read the nonverbal behaviors of the person that you're talking to. Body language and vocal patterns become very important. Your posture indicates how interested you are in the conversation, so leaning forward can be helpful. Proxemics is the study of how closely we stand to the other person. So in the American culture, we typically like a 2-foot bubble, so standing too close can often be intimidating. So just create a comfortable atmosphere where you can both communicate effectively. Also, use gestures appropriately, not too much and not too little. Maintain appropriate eye contact. Again, not too much and not too little. Some of the eye contact may be cultural in nature, but if you are going to be an effective listener, you need to look into their eyes and see the other speaker eye to eye. Use facial expressions to show the speaker that you are listening, so perhaps raising your eyebrows and nodding. And watch your vocal tone, the intonation, the pace, and the pitch of what you're saying. Really what you're trying to do is read the emotion behind the message. Now, when reading nonverbals, it's important to recognize that there may be some possible cultural differences in terms of how we communicate. For example, handshakes might be commonplace in American culture and Western Europe. However, some cultures may prefer bowing. Eye contact, we're typically told to make eye contact with people that we're talking to. However, in other cultures, it might be seen as rude or offensive or too aggressive. Gestures may differ. For example, the V sign might be considered vulgar in Australia, And certainly thumbs up could be misconstrued as a gesture in other parts of the world. Also consider space and how closely you stand to people. We like a 2-foot bubble in the United States, but sometimes other cultures are different. Also, with regard to touch, you probably don't need to touch people, and some people find it offensive to be touched certainly anywhere besides a handshake. Facial expressions might be perceived as being different in certain parts of the world, and excessive smiling might be misperceived as well. Also consider differences in vocal patterns. How loudly people speak differs from culture to culture, but also from various places in the United States. So be cautious about your facial expressions, your tone of voice, and ensure that it's appropriate given the circumstances. And when communicating with people from other cultures, don't assume. Ask a lot of questions and be aware of your own communication style. Avoid assumptions, preconceptions, and stereotypes, and don't make commentary that could be perceived as inappropriate or unprofessional. Respect the differences that we have and value people for the skills they bring to the table. Listen actively and demonstrate respect and professionalism at all times. To maximize your listening power, you want to engage in respectful behavior. Tune into the conversation, remove barriers and noise, and participate in the conversation by asking questions and engaging with the speaker. This way we can be an active listener versus a passive listener. A passive listener is someone who shows up, but just sits there quietly, says nothing more than nodding and saying, uh-huh. A selective listener would be someone who is tuned out, but when something is said that's interesting to them, they engage in the conversation. An attentive listener might appear that they are listening, and they may frequently say things and respond to questions. However, the attentive listener is not capturing fully the meaning of the person's message. To maximize your listening power, you want to be an active listener. This is sometimes referred to as responsive listening or reflective listening. Actively listening to the content, asking questions, providing verbal feedback, clarifying and confirming that the message expressed is understood. Active listening takes time and there's more conversation about the topic. However, you always are able to communicate to the best of your abilities. With active listening, it's important to stay engaged, and there's a lot to remember. However, if you could just think of the acronym SAVE, you'll be on your way to be a better listener. The acronym SAVE stands for Summarize, Ask Questions, Validate, and Evaluate. It's important to keep these items in mind if you want to be an active listener. Summarize the conversation to make sure that you have received the entire message. Pause at certain points to make sure that you are checking in with the person. You can paraphrase or restate what they've said. You could repeat or echo what they've stated. Don't just parrot what they've said, and certainly don't add your own commentary. Keep objective when you're summarizing what you've heard. A is for asking questions. Ask for clarification often to make sure that you are hearing what the speaker wants you to hear. Probe with open-ended questions. Those are questions that don't have a specific answer, but get the other person to start talking. But when you want to gather facts, use closed-ended questions. How many, how far, what time, those sorts of questions. And V stands for validate. Validation is an important aspect of effective listening. Offer encouragement, don't rush to fill silences, and say things like, I understand. I can see how that could be upsetting. Validate the person's thoughts, ideas, concepts, and emotions. Let them know that you're hearing the message behind what they're saying. You don't have to agree with them, but you can validate the fact that they have some good points, even if you don't agree with them. And finally, evaluate. Summarize the conversation to make sure that you have received the entire message. Get confirmation of your understanding and get commitment from the person if appropriate. And before you respond, think about whether input is necessary. Consciously decide whether to add input. Certainly don't solve the person's problem for them. You can say, here's a suggestion you may want to consider, or have you thought about this angle? You may not have a response, and you may need to get back to the person if required. And that's better than coming up with a knee-jerk reaction to what they're talking about. So remember, you have 2 eyes and 1 mouth, and you should use them accordingly when you're communicating. So try to listen twice as much as you talk. In summary, listen to the meaning behind the message. Engage in the conversation and listen actively. Summarize, ask questions, validate, and evaluate. And try to think before you respond. Also recognize the cultural differences we may have in communication styles. Thank you. This has been a presentation of Eye to Eye Workplace, Listening for Better Communication. Congratulations! You just completed one of more than 30 modules from Eye to Eye Workplace. These modules are provided on YouTube for your benefit to preview the extensive training content of our management training modules. After 4 modules, you can take a multiple-choice online 10-question test based on the content of 4 of the videos on YouTube. There are tests available for team leadership, interviewing and hiring, talent management, performance management, communication, efficiency, and customer service. You'll earn a certificate of completion. For only $9.99, you can document your management success. Go to eyetoeyeworkplace.com/store, pay $9.99 for each module, and you'll get a link to the certification test. For more high-impact, low-cost training, follow Eye to Eye Workplace on LinkedIn and YouTube. Or visit our website at www.eyetoeyeworkplace.com. Thank you.